Welcome to another episode of What We Didn't Say on Sunday. My name is Jordan Massey, and this is a special episode because I'm joined by not only Pastor David, but also Richie Baldwin is here in the room with us. We've got three people, and I didn't preach on Sunday, but David and Richie did. And so we're here to share with you, rather they're here to share with you the things that they didn't say, the things left on the cutting room floor. That's the purpose of this podcast. When we preach on Sunday, we want to give you our sermon leftovers. And so Richie and Pastor David are here to share with you what they didn't say on Sunday. Hey guys, welcome.
Hey, it's good to be here.
How we doing?
Well, I'm better now that, Richie came bearing gifts today.
Oh yeah.
You and I just shared
turkey sticks.
Nick sticks.
That
That is a gift from Rebecca to me, and then I shared it with y'all.
Yeah.
So there you go.
It's very tasty. I will say, I'm getting a little bit of. Did either of you eat liverwurst growing up?
No.
Praise
Do you
the
know
Lord,
what it
I'm
is?
No.
No.
It's like very, very processed meat.
Yeah.
I'm getting a little bit of that.
Yeah. Liver was not at the top of our list.
Oh.
I did eat chicken livers.
Chicken livers?
Kentucky Fried Chicken made some good chicken livers.
They used to do that?
Yep. Deep fried chicken livers.
Wow.
I bet they still do.
See, I don't
Not
eat,
around here.
I don't eat
think.
chicken on the bone. Any kind of meat that's still on the bone, whether it's chicken, ribs, anything.
Chicken
do.
livers is like a nugget.
It's
a liver nugget.
Do you know most meat starts on a bone?
it does, but
Originally.
it looks, what I'm looking at is too close to the original.
It's too close to the original.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's so funny. All right.
Wow.
Well, how was Sunday, guys? Y'all have a good Sunday?
Fantastic.
It was great. It
Yeah?
was very much a blessing. Yes.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
Great text. Great text.
Well, we're going to have a great time here, and I'm going to have an even better time. As I said before we started recording, I don't have to say anything meaningful. This is all on the two of you. So I'm just going to walk us through this, but we begin each episode of What We Didn't Say on Sunday with sermon recaps, 3-minute sermon recaps, because we want the people listening, the people watching to know what we did say before we talk about what we didn't say. And you both preached on Hebrews 11:39 through 12:2, somewhere in that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Somewhere in that range. And so we'd love to hear from each of you in turn. Actually, it'd be fun. Same time.
Oh.
Simultaneous sermon
That
recaps. What do you think
It
about
might
that?
be confusing.
Just kidding. All right, so in turn, I'm going to get the clock app out here so that I can put on my 3-minute timer. Pastor David.
Oh, I think I should go second. Since
Okay.
I could play being Jordan today. Because I always go first.
That's fair.
We let our guests go first.
We'll let our guests go first.
Or is that too much pressure, Richie?
no,
Good.
I'm there.
All
You're
right,
good.
he's-
Okay.
he's
It's good.
ready.
It's good.
Hey, he says, you stay ready so you don't have to get ready.
Yes.
That's
all
right.
right. Good.
All right, so Richie, in 3 minutes or less, if you really want to make Pastor David and I look bad, give us your sermon recap from Sunday morning starting
This is the pressure.
now.
All right. Well, obviously it was the summary of and the ending, the conclusion of our series by faith, and the text the main idea of my sermon was to live by faith. We must look at Jesus. I just took it right from the text, right from Hebrews 12:2.
Good idea.
And so my first point was we are looking for the better covenant. That's that Hebrews 11:39 and 40. What all of those characters in Hebrews 11 they died before what was promised, and ultimately that comes about by the better covenant, the new covenant, what Jesus completes. That's what we see, the founder and perfecter of our faith. So that was the first point that I had. The second point is that we're running that race with endurance. We're looking to running that race with endurance. So that language, the metaphor of the race, we'll talk about this in some of the stuff that we didn't say, but that analogy of a race was the ancient part of they would run without clothing or minimal clothing, of getting rid of all of those encumbrances of the world, of our flesh, of the enemy. So talked about that. And then the third point was looking to Jesus. He is the founder, the perfecter of our faith. Interwoven in all of that, I'm right back from the mission field, so I couldn't help but using the illustration from the conversation that I had with a gentleman who was very much Islamic And it was at that point in the mission field where I was really, really tired. And I had intentionally told my wife I was going to turn off for the 3 hours and the drive from Belgium to Amsterdam to get to the airport. And then God presented this opportunity. So I literally found comfort in those verses of preaching those and remembering that time and that illustration that I used on Sunday of looking to Jesus to provide me with the strength. Because as an extroverted introvert, my tank was empty, and so I used that in the sermon throughout on Sunday. And then I ended on the application was Hebrews 12:3, consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. That is what I ended on, and that was the challenge that I gave to the folks at Southwest, that we are considering him. He did this for us. He endured it for us, because the endurance that we see that we run in this race, Christ endured on the cross.
There you go.
That was my sermon.
All right.
Oh, come on now. You got 30 seconds left.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I knew he's going to do it. Just
He
come
showed
in
us
here,
up.
make us look bad.
Come in here and make us look bad.
All right.
That's
Well,
all right.
Pastor David, you have 2 minutes and 30 seconds.
All right.
I'm just kidding.
I'll
All right.
do
So
my best.
in 3 minutes or less, let's hear your sermon recap from Sunday morning starting now.
So I really focused in on Hebrews 12. So it was all about the race, and the main point is that we have to run our race with endurance. So endurance was kind of the big theme, and to run with endurance, there are several things that are listed in this passage. We have to prepare properly, and so we need to set aside every encumbrance and set aside entangling sin. And so we work through kind of what those things were, the weight that the encumbrance was more the unnecessary, and the sin was the unholy. And we all have to dig through those things and make sure. So that kind of took a self-examination in proper preparation, because to run with endurance, we need to make sure we are continually examining ourselves. But the second point is we need a continual inspiration. And so we have that participle, looking to Jesus, continually looking to Jesus. And then the next verse, it says, continually consider him, logizomai. So think again and again and again about Jesus. We need that continual inspiration if we're going to run with endurance. And so we look at how Jesus ran his race. And I gave 3 points, still in line with this running idea. Jesus hydrated on Scripture. He continually kept feeding on the truth. And so we need to do the same. Man cannot live on bread alone, but on every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. And then Jesus continually communicated with the Father. So to run with endurance, he required prayer and required communication, the hydration with the Word, and then the anticipation of joy is for him to run that race with endurance. He anticipated the joy beyond the cross. And so modeling our run by being inspired by Christ helps us run with endurance. So preparation, and then inspiration from the Lord Jesus. And finally, the point that I didn't get to, I'm going to share because I had to leave it on the cutting room floor. My entire third point,
Wow.
I didn't get to.
So don't say it now.
I'm not going to say it now because that's where I landed.
Okay. You're done?
I'm done.
It's me.
It is you.
I slow everyone
it's not
down.
Me, it's you.
Wow. You did that with 40 seconds. You did it faster than Richie.
Well, and I think my sermon, Bo, I think I did pretty good on time. I was like 12:06, 12:05.
Wow.
I didn't go to my normal 12:15. I don't know what's up with that. 36-minute sermon.
Wow.
Whoa. Amazing.
Yeah. My worship team doesn't know what to do.
All right. Well, that's great. I'd love to hear. It sounds like you both took a similar approach to such an incredible passage. And what a great culmination to this series and also this text that we've been looking at for several weeks now. I am curious, though. Did we put our foot in our mouths? Are there any sermon bloopers that you want to share from Sunday? You were at Southwest, so I didn't have anyone texting me or calling me saying, Richie can never preach again. He said the most ridiculous thing. But anything you feel like you wish you would have said better or...
Always. I always critique myself. But I don't remember any bloopers per se. But it was there was a couple of times where especially on the founder and the perfecter of our faith, making sure to clarify that, hold on, Jesus was never created. He wasn't the beginning. He's like always with the Father. So making sure to make that point. I did not want to make that blooper through that text, that he is the founder and perfecter of our faith. So I don't remember any explicit bloopers, but maybe you'll get some critique later. Or we'll
I get to watch your sermon later too. Amen. So maybe next week, when you're not here, I'll just talk about all the bloopers in your sermon.
Yeah. That's not fair. I did only odd time. There was a moment in my message in the first service where I've been alluding to a lot of athletic illustrations, metaphors, because the Scripture's full of them, and I love it. And people are probably sick of me talking about my basketball career, my athletic career. And I joke a lot. I always kind of joke like I was good, and so I hope people know I'm joking. I hope they know that I'm not taking myself that seriously. But I did truly have a Larry Bird poster and a Dr. J poster. And so I said, did any of the rest of you have those posters up? And there were one or two out there. So sometimes I'm wondering, am I really connecting through these sports analogies? I mentioned ESPN the week before, and I'm like, how many of you watched Love Top 10 Plays? Like 9 people out of 500. I'm like, that's not true. There's got to be more. And but I noticed I said I was trying to teach myself to shoot like Larry Bird, and I was making this motion, and then I just kept making that motion while I was talking.
You were dancing.
Bo, did you catch me doing
like
that?
You're doing it right now.
I was like, and then I can't just let it go. When I notice I'm doing something stupid, I just have to say, why am I doing this? You don't know what I'm doing, but it was an odd thing to be doing.
Can you please clip this in?
Yeah.
Clip this in to the podcast.
Because Larry Bird he brought the ball way over here to the side, and I really tried to model his, and he angled his body, and so I did a lot of that.
There we go.
But people,
and
so
if
be
you're
careful.
If you're just listening, for our listening only audience, just know about right now, Bo Martin has put in a wonderful clip, and the people watching are watching that. And Pastor David using his right hand, is shooting a basketball over and over and over again. That's what's happening
doing
in the room.
While I'm preaching, I continually practice my shot.
There we go. And you also broke your microphone.
And I broke my microphone. But another thing that I did is one of our regular listeners called me out. She's at church. She's like, you mentioned how excited you were that people under 25, anytime they say something good about your sermon, it really gets you excited. And she's like, what about the rest of us? I felt a little less important. Us older folks are more important. So if any of you felt any kind of slight at any age, I'm very excited if you get anything out of my message, no matter what age. But I do stand behind the fact that if a college student really gets excited about your message, there's just something special about that.
Sure.
For a high schooler.
Yeah. Because
I don't expect them to. Maybe that's because I have a inferiority complex, or I'm worried that I'm too old for college students. So anytime they affirm me, maybe that's just pride.
I'm just going to help you offend everyone now.
Yeah.
It really was more of a comment about young people than it was older people.
Yeah.
In that you don't expect it, and when it happens, that's exciting.
Yes.
But older people, you expect them that they're locked in, they're paying attention,
Yeah.
they're getting stuff from your sermons.
Yeah. So I'm actually, any compliment always is helpful to me, so I'm excited anytime it comes.
There we go. Yep. All right. Well, hey, there's your sermon bloopers. Far better than most of the things I do on Sunday mornings. Let's continue with really the bulk of what we didn't say on Sunday, and think about historical context. That's often a category in which things are left on the cutting room floor, that they aren't critical for understanding the passage, but they're certainly there. And so anything in relation to the historical context that were sermon leftovers for either of you can go in turn. You're the guest. You get to go first. That's what I've been told.
From a historical context standpoint, one of the just from this passage. I loved, and I didn't, my point being looking to Jesus, that participle is just so important. I love the play on words, and I didn't get a chance to really look at, and maybe this is more literary context than historical context, but more historical in the Jewish sense, is that looking to Jesus, I love how the author takes the perspective of faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. And then he turns that into looking to Jesus. It's just a masterwork of words. But then what I didn't get to at all is, I think, is the high point of what the Jewish people were wanting to do, is to shrink back, to lose their endurance and go back to where they were before. Like, this is hard. Following Christ is hard, and they were wanting to shrink back. They're wanting to, they were losing their endurance, and that's that imperative at the end of chapter 10. And then he gives us all these examples. But I think the high point comes whenever he says, well, if you shrink back, and this is more of the historical context, that you are going to be going to a mountain that you can't even touch. It's that Hebrews 12, 18 beyond. It's like, you're going to go to this Mount Sinai. For you have not come to what may be touched, a blazing fire and darkness and gloom and tempest and the sound of a trumpet, a voice of words made hearing beg that no further messages be spoken to them. I mean, this is the covenant, the old covenant of Moses. Next to what you following Christ, that you then approach to the one that is the perfecter, the judge of all, the Jerusalem, the innumerable angels and festive gathering. That's the mountain that you approach. So I think that's like the culmination of all of that. Jesus is greater, that the author is trying to convey in Hebrews. And I didn't get to any of that, and it was hard not to get to it, because our shrinking back and all the examples in chapter 11 is really that, hey, all of these approach that peaceful mountain, Mount Zion, not Mount Sinai, that the old covenant brought us to, that it eventually leads to our death, the perfection that is the covenant and the imperfection of us. So I wasn't able to get to any of that, and that to me is one of the most beautiful passages in Hebrews.
Yeah. I agree. It's I think he was directing their attention away from maybe their earlier heroes. They would have focused on a Moses, and they would have focused on an Abraham, and his whole point is they had faith, but they didn't get what was promised until we came along.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we perfected it. So you're part of this story. Don't keep looking back. You're surrounded by this cloud of examples, but we're focused on Jesus, and it's so true. He's really, the whole book of Hebrews is to get their eyes off of Moses, off of angels, off of those kind of things. Let them be examples.
Yeah.
But they're in the cloud. Sort of like our documents are in the cloud. They're in the cloud of witness. I kept thinking about, anytime I see that word cloud, I wanted an illustration somehow that went with keeping our data in a cloud, but it didn't quite fit. Couldn't make that work. But we focus on Jesus, and I love that the author of Hebrews, I think Jesus' name isn't used till like chapter 3 or 4, when his name first appears. And it's so powerful in the book of Hebrews when he comes in, he just says Jesus.
Yeah.
And it's just explodes off the page of Judaism and all of this Hebrew background. So Hebrews is one of the greatest books in the Bible in terms of having to know the historical background of the readers and knowing the Old Testament, and knowing, it's like Revelation. We've been in 2 books back to back.
Yeah.
That without the Old Testament, Jesus doesn't explode off the page like he does in this book.
Yeah, and even in this chapter and leading into chapter 12, it's the same way. Like, the name of Jesus isn't mentioned in all of chapter 11.
Right.
And so you get that same kind of effect where these stories are told, and then this ultimate climax, and then finally the name of Jesus, like as you've said, explodes off the page.
And I don't know if this is, we talked about it in our preaching team meeting on Wednesday, Joshua's name isn't mentioned.
Yeah.
In any of this, in that shared name in the Hebrew,
Yeah.
Yeshua, he mentions Rahab instead of Joshua, and it's...
He didn't want to spoil it.
He was like still waiting
yeah.
for the name of Jesus, of mentioning like the
Yeah.
explosion off the page in chapter 12. He intentionally lists Rahab rather than listing.
That's a great point.
I think you're right.
I hadn't even thought about that. We talked about the significance of it, Rahab being mentioned and not Joshua, but perhaps that is why.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like it
is the same name, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can't wait. He's getting to verse 2 of chapter 12. It's just coming.
Well, you mentioned it, so I want to go there, and this is a little bit theological, but I'm curious if you guys took time to explain that last phrase in verse 40, that apart from us, they should not be made perfect. Did you do that in your sermons? If not, would you explain it to me here? Because I'm still trying to figure out what that phrase means.
I did it implicitly through my first point of talking about that the covenant of those that were, I want to go back to that old covenant. I want to go back to the old way. And he's like, look, don't lose your endurance. That's already been perfected, the founder, perfecter, Jesus. So I did, but not explicitly in words, because that is a tough verse.
Yeah.
It is and I already had an 8-page outline, and I did go long at Southwest.
Oh, did you? How long?
Yes, like 42 minutes.
Well, that's a blooper.
Oh, that's yeah.
You should have mentioned that. Just kidding.
Yeah.
So yes and no.
Well, what are our thoughts? I mean, is it simply that we inherit the covenant that they were looking to? It seems.
Well, I think I always interpreted that when they say we were made perfect, they're talking about the entire church of the Old Testament saints through the end of the New Testament saints. That without Christ, we wouldn't have the New Testament saints joining the Old Testament saints. So I see it as completing the entire work. It wouldn't have happened without Jesus.
Yeah.
Bringing in the Gentiles, bringing and completing the incomplete part of Judaism, because he came in and he fulfilled the prophecies, fulfilled the covenant.
Yeah.
That he was the missing piece that brought in all the Gentiles and filled the hole.
Yeah.
That was in the Old Testament covenant that made it obsolete. That it made it complete when he came. That's how I saw it when it says perfected.
Yeah. So I totally agree to an extent. I'm curious that apart from us, they should not be made perfect. And so you're saying the us is
New Testament
church, yes. Gentiles coming in, the completion of God's people, that kind of understanding?
I did not dig into it.
Yeah.
I could be completely wrong. I just assumed that when I read it. That's
Sure.
kind of my first thought on
Yeah.
it.
You want to add thoughts?
I think I agree with all of that. I think it's forward looking. In chapter 11, he's looking back at all of these figures. And this faith that he's talking about throughout all of these 39 verses, it's obviously forward looking, yet in hindsight of all of these figures, all of them have been forward looking to Christ. As Christ is the one who's done all of this. So even it's apart from us, they should not be made perfect. So yes, I agree with all that, and it's that forward-looking faith as we're looking forward to, because I think it goes back to chapter 10 of that imperative whenever he quotes, yet a little while and the coming one will come and will not delay. It's that part of that's that forward-looking faith. So yeah, I agree. I didn't dig into it. I looked at some of the detail, but really wanted to focus on and take the time in the sermon. I was already at 42 minutes of chapter 12, verses 1 and 2.
Oh, for sure,
But it doesn't mean that it gets glossed over. I would add, I love that the author uses the first person plural pronoun, us. He's including himself into all of this. Mm-hmm. He's not excluding himself.
Yeah.
It's just a beautiful picture that I'm with you in this. I get it. I get your struggle, and I'm in this with you.
Yeah.
I just think it's a beautiful picture of the author.
I think now that I'm looking at these two verses together, Jordan, in verse 39, he says all of these people we've just studied earned a good reputation or a commendation. Mm-hmm. Remember that word? Mm-hmm. Is that he was commended. Mm-hmm. And he replaces commendation with perfection. Mm. And so I think it is tied to the idea of the gospel and the work of Christ on the cross turns that statement of God. Abraham was made righteous when he was deemed righteous. That could not happen apart from the cross.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's perfected in the future work of the cross.
Yeah.
Now it was assigned, but it was sort of like an IOU.
Yeah.
I owe you, but I'm going to fill it.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm thinking wrong, but I
I think everything you're saying is absolutely true.
Yeah, I love it when you do.
The
and they knew it. They knew that.
Yeah.
The promises of God. It's all of these figures know that.
The one thing that I thought of that I think is just another example is I think we think about the promise to Abraham that's mentioned here is that he would have descendants as innumerable as the stars and as the sea of the sand, and God's faithfulness to His promise is contingent upon that becoming a reality. And we see, like we saw in Revelation, the fulfillment of that is the complete people of God.
144,000.
That's right, the 144,000. And so I think that I don't think that's everything that verse 40 is speaking about, but I do think that's an example, perhaps, of a way in which we are a part of the perfection of those who came before us, in that we are a part of God's faithfulness to His promise. And what they saw from afar, we are tasting more and more in its fullness, whatever that's worth. Okay, so that's a little bit of historical context. We that's literary context too, because we've been looking at anything other that you would want to mention as far as literary context goes. The one thing I'll say, did either of you see people arguing for Pauline authorship of Hebrews from Hebrews 12?
That was a sermon blooper for me because I did say
Paul?
in the middle, I said Paul, and I went and I had to
man.
correct myself. I think it was an 11 o'clock service. And I said, I don't think Paul wrote this.
Yeah.
Before knowing Greek, I did think Paul was the author of Hebrews.
Yeah.
And then once I delved into
It's so
Greek,
different. Yeah.
it's so different.
Yep.
I was like, no, it's not Paul.
But speaking of literary context, because of the language of running a race, this kind of Olympian type of language,
yes.
this pretty common language for Paul, and so some people will point to this passage
and that
evidence
may have
of
been a
that.
blooper. I had to kind of, because I brought out, in fact, I opened with these scriptures out of 1 Corinthians. I run the race, I don't box without aim, and I was quoting Paul as being a sports enthusiast, but then I had to say, but I don't know that he wrote this, and but it did sound a lot like him.
Yeah, this particular passage,
Yes.
for sure. I will say just a little sidebar. I've been reading through the Gospel of Luke, and there's a resurgence, I think, of the idea that Luke wrote Hebrews. And I'm seeing a lot of similar themes in the Gospel of Luke, particularly in what Luke emphasizes in Jesus' teaching. And so even that Hebrews does this argument, the author of Hebrews in chapter 1 talks about like how it's the punishment for neglecting the gospel is more severe. Like there's more responsibility for you than for those who received the law from angels. You've received the gospel from the Lord Himself. And so how much more accountable are we? And that's exactly what Jesus does as He talks about, woe to you who hear this and don't repent. And this kind of better for those of old, that kind of argument. But anyways, whoever you think wrote the book of Hebrews, that doesn't really change how we interpret this passage. But anything else literary context-wise that y'all left on the cutting room floor that you want to mention here?
I did mention that it's unfortunate there's a chapter break. You really need to know that 12 is where he was heading with 11 the entire time was through the exhortation.
Correct.
So I brought that up, but it's worth repeating. This is the exhortation that we've been waiting for, and it is to endure. Run the race with endurance. I think that qualifier of running the race is what the whole book is about. It's going to require faith requires endurance. Which brings me to a theological matter. Is that what's next?
That's what's next.
Yeah.
Take us to it.
I think there's two things I wanted to ask you guys about in particular. and I've had a couple of discussions with some folks about this, backsliding, not persevering to the end. What if a person denies Christ after 40 years of faith and they die without ever reconnecting? This really is one of the more challenging theological aspects, and I tend to be a little more on probably the Reformed side or Calvinistic side on this particular issue. Is that when I say it simplistically, once you're born again, you can't become unborn again with the potential of being born again. Mm-hmm. And so the idea is that those who are saved will persevere, and that the ultimate fruit of them being born again is that they do endure, they don't fall away. Or you can really see the book of Hebrews as this falling away is not to eternal destruction. It's a following away to worse discipline by the Lord and some sort of, of losing your full reward. That's one of the toughest points of studying Hebrews, and really trying to get a hold of what is he saying and to whom is he saying it. Are these to lost people? If you fall away, you've never been saved. Yeah. But there are folks in our church that it's just, for them, it's really a falling away is losing your salvation. Yeah.
You want to go first?
Sure.
You take this?
I'm reform leaning. I do believe in the perseverance of the saints.
Which for our listeners is the P of tulip.
Yes.
Right?
But there are parts of tulip that I don't agree with. But that's one that I think once you are saved, you know that assurance. There's so many verses that go to that. But it's the challenge of this is that endurance that we do run as Christians. That it is hard. And we have those periods that we may feel apart from the Lord, but He is indeed there, looking to Jesus, that we know that we are saved. The whole part of the backsliding, is it in 1 John? I was trying to find the verse really quickly. He's like, well, those that have left, were they even of us? I think that's in 1 John.
Yes, it is.
And that's that.
By virtue of leaving, they showed that they really were never of us.
Yeah, it's that. The other verses, whenever they're, Christ says, you've done all these works, but I never knew you. You were never of me. You did it for your own vanity. You did it for your own glory. Yeah. I never knew you. Even though you expelled demons, all of these things, I never knew you. So I think that's the juxtaposition between those two.
There's certainly, I think the church often finds itself in an unhealthy place on either side of the spectrum here. There are folks who their quote unquote doctrine of the assurance of salvation looks like, well, if you say the sinner's prayer, you're good. Doesn't matter what happens in your life after that. If you had a moment, you walked the aisle, and you have people, it's really sad. Yeah. You've got people who are 70 years old, who haven't followed the Lord, haven't been obedient to His calling. Their life looks nothing like Jesus, but they're holding on to the fact that when they were 15, they walked an aisle and said a sinner's prayer. That's not the doctrine of the assurance of salvation. And on the other side, you have what essentially becomes work salvation. And I think that a biblical view of the assurance of salvation, I think the perseverance of the saints, the doctrine of that is so important that we believe we are saved by God's grace. We're saved by an act of God. And because of that, it is God who started it. It's God who finishes it. This is Paul's point to the church in Philippi in Philippians 1:6. God's going to complete the work in them. Now, of course, he's speaking to a community, but even still, he's saying, hey, what God started, He's going to complete. But the important part of that is that will look like increasing obedience and righteousness in your life. That if God has justified you, if you are regenerate, if you've been born again, you will be sanctified. And that's the doctrine of the perseverance of the saints, that those who are believers will persevere to the end because It's God's work in them, and God is faithful to finish what he started. And I think the author of Hebrews, this is kind of what we do with church discipline, where church membership isn't about, I know 100% you are a believer. Because we can't know of anyone 100% that you're a believer. Church membership is, hey, with everything I can tell, you are a believer. Like with all the faculties I have, and every conversation we've had, you've proven, you've given the evidence that you are a believer, and so we're going to allow you to be a member of this church. Well, then what is church discipline? Excommunication at the end of church discipline. Well, that is, hey, now, with all the evidence you've given us, you seem to not be a believer. You're unrepentant. And if you're not a believer, you can't take from this cup, and you can't be a part of this biblical community. You can't be a member. And so I think the author of Hebrews is writing as someone who doesn't know.
Right.
Like he doesn't know 100% who in his audience is true.
Yeah.
Who in his audience is really believers. And he's pleading with them to prove themselves to be true.
And if you've just tasted it,
yes,
and you fall away, you can be worse off than the beginning. You've kind of inoculated yourself to it. So press on. That is, I think you're exactly right, is that he doesn't know, because there's a mixed group. And it's always a mixed group.
Yeah.
Every time I preach, I'm preaching to believers and unbelievers. And you never know for sure. And so, but running with endurance is a great message for the saved, in terms of, we don't sit back and say, well, I'm saved, got to get me through to the end.
Yeah.
He'll do it. No, it's a command.
Yeah.
You must lay aside and continually look and watch out for getting entangled in sin. You've got to that's your part in this.
Yeah.
And so we can't just look to God and say, well, it's all, God's going to do it all. Well, he does in a sense, but he does it by commanding us, and us obeying his commands. One of the commentators said that laying down a burden, a weight, in this context, it was really referring to them laying down their works-based Old Testament way of salvation. That they couldn't run this Christian race and carry the baggage of Judaism. Only the good stuff. They had to lay that down. It was it wasn't going to work. I thought that was rather interesting.
No, that is interesting. And you reminded me of Philippians 2 with what you were saying about there's a balance there. It's not that we just, because we believe it's God's work, well, God, Paul says to the church in Philippi, work out your own salvation as God works in you according to his will and good pleasure. And so that's that balance. And this is, by the way, I wish someone would have told me this when I was younger. I really do. But this is why we grow in assurance. Like you grow in assurance of salvation. And I was taught as a young man that if I was truly saved, I would just know 100%. And it's why I was baptized 4 times.
Yeah.
Because I was taught that any doubt or question I had was evidence that I wasn't saved. Yeah. And so I need to say that prayer a different way and say it the right way. And ultimately that's works. Like that's a works salvation. If you've got to say a prayer the right way, the perfect way, the right words, that's borderline like witchcraft. That's
and baptism. If you need to be baptized over and over again, that's not a work of salvation.
And it holds the power over the person of whoever's the priest or the pastor who's putting that over you, that you have to do that. It's fear.
Yeah.
Rather than the assurance of what you know that God is doing through you. I had used in my first point, I used Deuteronomy 30 after Moses is reminding the people of where they're going. And in Deuteronomy 30, he says, it's not too hard for you. It's not too difficult. The word is near you. It is in your heart. And then Paul quotes that again in Romans chapter 10. And he says, this is the word of faith that we proclaim, that if you confess Christ as Lord with your mouth and you believe in your heart that he rose from the dead, and there's that promise, you will be saved.
Yeah.
And that is the start of the work. And now you're saved by grace to do good works.
Yeah.
That is that part of that sanctification.
Yeah.
It's
And then as you grow and as you're sanctified, you grow in the assurance of the work that God began. And that's a lesson I had to learn later because no one told me that. And this is what I think the author of Hebrews is trying to do. He wants to increase their assurance.
Mm-hmm.
And he wants to encourage them to persevere. And like even Hebrews 6, which is one of the more tricky texts in Hebrews, where we're dealing with that question of apostasy and falling away, the author of Hebrews concludes a warning to not fall away with this. Though we speak in this way, yet in your case, beloved, we feel sure of better things, things that belong to salvation. And so it's meant to be an encouragement to believers. It's meant to be a strengthening of their assurance.
At the end of chapter 10, he said, but I'm convinced we're not of these that fall away.
Correct.
And I love that he includes himself, we, and then in this command, he includes himself, let us.
Yeah.
So I think it's like you said, it's a positive. Hey, I've got one more theological point where I know we're going to run out of time. But I think this is interesting.
Yeah.
It's sometimes people will use verse 1 and 2 as a proof text that people in heaven are watching us live our lives on planet Earth, which I really reject that as a possibility.
Sure.
To me, that would really ruin heaven. And heaven is not I don't think it's a place where people are actively concerned about our daily lives down here.
Yeah.
But you may have some different thoughts on that.
Well, I think it's actually that interpretation, I believe, is the opposite of what we're meant to assume from that text alone. I mean, he says we're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. Who are they witnessing about and to? Not us. They're not witnesses and then they're watching us. What is he about to command all of us to do? Looking to Jesus.
Right.
They're witnesses of Jesus. They're not looking at us. They're looking to Jesus, just like the author of Hebrews commands the audience to do. And I also think that they're in a cloud, not because they're in the sky. I think they're in a cloud because you're not meant to see them. Like it's like this image of, hey, they're there. We remember their stories, but they're not ultimately who we look to. We look to Jesus. So I think to take from this that our family members are watching our lives, like there's some theater in heaven where they're just watching what's going on. I don't think this is a proof text that isn't happening, though I don't think it is. I do think, however, that is not at all the point of this passage, and in fact, the opposite is the point of this passage.
And if we're looking to Jesus, we're definitely not praying to a saint.
Correct.
We don't pray to a dead person. We are, no matter how saintly they were, they're not up there interceding for us.
Correct.
In that way.
Yeah.
In that way. So I just thought that was interesting.
As our resident former Catholic, do
yes,
you have anything to contribute?
Completely agree. If that was any inclination, the author would not say in verse 2 that word looking, that participle. It would be a different word. It would be different. He says, don't look. I've used all of these examples for 40 verses. Look to Jesus.
Yeah.
Look to Jesus. Whoever's in heaven, we are looking at Jesus. I mean, I come from the Catholic faith with saints and stuff, and the entirety of this book, nothing affirms that.
No.
And in this metaphor of the race, this great cloud of witnesses, and using this race, we're not being watched by them. They are looking to Jesus. They have looked to Jesus.
Yeah.
Even when they didn't look. No, they were looking to Jesus. Abraham, when he fills out the promise. Enoch, of this whole entire time, they've been looking to Jesus. The promise that would be Jesus Christ. Yeah.
And I want to be careful here because, I don't want to make anyone think that I don't think there's going to be some kind of reunion in heaven. I do think that those that you love, that you knew, that you will be a part of that family of God with them in heaven. But we also need to be cautious about what our hope actually is. And if our hope and our greatest desire for heaven is to be with the people we've lost, then we have a misaligned hope and desire. Our greatest desire should be to be in the presence of God forever. And so, again, it's not that it's something that our hearts ache. We long to be with those people. I've got plenty of people that I can't wait to be with again. I've got 2 miscarried children that I look forward to meeting one day and have a hope that I will meet one day. But that's not my greatest desire. That's not my greatest hope. And so we do need to be careful there as well, and in the way that we think about heaven.
The great thing about Christianity is that we do have that reunion.
Yeah.
And we don't have to, my father passed away in March, and I've noticed a couple of times where I kind of wanted to talk to him.
Yeah.
Just in a moment. Dad, and as if he were here. And I know that desire and that feeling that somehow they're listening to you.
Yeah.
They want what's best for you. Well, they do. But it is only going to be a moment in time for our loved ones that are in heaven. I don't think it's going to be, I think it's just going to be a moment before we're resurrected to be with them from their standpoint.
Yeah.
They're not lonely kind of watching us,
sitting
around.
on the bench outside of the gates.
It is not like
waiting on their
that.
wife.
No. We're
it's
in
a country song, right?
It's exactly. We are in a race. We are running a race of endurance, and we got to be looking to Jesus. And the final point that I left on the cutting room floor goes back to our sanctification. One of the ways we do persevere is He disciplines us.
Yeah.
And that was my third point: is running with endurance requires loving correction, and He has to keep us on the track.
Yeah.
Or we will fall off. And so He disciplines us, and He's committed to our fruitfulness and committed to our longevity, but committed to the point that He will discipline us and chastise us and reprove us.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the next sermon for me.
Sweet.
Yeah, we get.
You already wrote your sermon for this week, last week.
Basically, I'm ready. But we have self-discipline, we have God's discipline, and then we have corporate discipline.
Yeah.
What you were talking about.
Yeah.
Is that as a church we help discipline each other.
Yeah.
To endure.
Yeah. Well, I'm very jealous of you, by the way, because in my sermon prep today, I completely scrapped everything, including the text I was going to preach on.
Wow.
So, preaching team in the morning gets a little bit of a fun surprise. We're going to learn a hard lesson about preaching in the morning when I sit down with everyone and say, hey, I know you already studied Judges 2, 6-15. We're not going to look at that. You should have given them
you should have let me lead the way on that.
I know.
But you didn't. You jumped ahead to Judges. I'm going to do one more out of Hebrews. I'm going to do, that's my third point.
Yeah.
Do a sermon on discipline, God's discipline to help us run the race. And then next week, we can talk about 2 different sermons. It'll be fun.
That will be fun. Yeah. All right. Well, hey, guys, thank you. This was fun, and this worked pretty well, Bo, with 3 people. Maybe we need to do this more often. We've even talked about just having a third person to be in the room, maybe someone who listens to the sermon. Yeah. So, hey, thank you all.
Or someone that knows what they're talking about.
Yeah, we need someone in here.
We should probably get somebody like that.
At least somebody. But hey, we thank our listeners and those watching. We just appreciate you so much, and we encourage you to keep listening, keep watching, share this with your friends, especially the people who are part of our church family at Westside. We believe this is a real resource and valuable. Now, we have fun making it, so we'd keep doing it even if we didn't think it was valuable, but we do believe in it, and we think it'd be great for more and more people to be listening to and watching. And as we've said, this coming Sunday, we're going to preach on 2 different texts. So we're going to have a fun episode next week because we're going to have things left on the cutting room floor, sermon leftovers, and we'll be back with you next week to share what we didn't say on Sunday.